The stagecoach jolted so hard that Clara Brooks nearly bit her tongue. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wheels hit a deep rut carved into the mountain trail, and the whole rig shuddered like it might come apart. She gripped the wooden seat knuckles white, trying not to cry out. She'd seen rough travel since leaving Missouri, but these mountain roads were something fierce, steep cliffs, dropping to a river that shimmered silver under the moon, a trail narrow enough to make a preacher pray. Up front, Clyde May, the driver, cracked his whip. The horses snorted and lunged forward, foam flying off their bridles. Clara's heart pounded like a drum. All she carried was a battered trunk, her medical satchel, and a small leather-bound journal she kept pressed close beneath her corset. To anyone else, it was just a nurse's notes. To Clara, it was the most dangerous thing she owned. Inside were names, coded shipments, secret tallies, proof of a smuggling ring she'd stumbled into by accident. She'd taken it from a dying Union quartermaster, a man shot down before her eyes. His last words still haunted her. "Don't let them bury this." The ledger exposed men trading guns, whiskey, even women. Clara had never wanted to carry anyone's secrets. She only wanted to heal. But fate didn't ask. A gunshot tore the night apart. Clyde shouted, "Raiders, hold fast!" The coach swayed as panic swept through the passengers. Clara ducked low, clutching her chest where the journal was hidden. Two riders burst from the shadows, faces covered rifles gleaming under the moon. Another shot cracked, echoing against the canyon walls. Across from her, Hank Dobbs, a merchant with trembling hands, tried to draw his pistol, but it slipped and hit the floorboards. Clara pressed herself back, fear and instinct colliding. The coach thundered toward a narrow bridge. Rotten planks stretched across a roaring gorge. Faster, Clyde yelled, lashing the reins. The horses hit the bridge at full gallop hooves, hammering the wood. The whole structure moaned. Then a plank snapped. The world tilted. Clara's scream caught in her throat as the coach pitched forward wheels, splintering horses crying out in terror. Wood shattered and everything went black, cold. That was the first thing she felt when she clawed back to consciousness. Bone-deep, river cold. She gasped, coughing up water lying half-submerged on a muddy bank. Her dress clung to her like a second skin. The dawn's light bled pale and blue over the shattered wreck of the stagecoach downstream. She coughed hard, ribs aching, and her fingers searched desperately at her chest. The journal still there, still safe. A low groan came from the reeds. Clara crawled forward and found Hank Dobbs sprawled out, his leg bent wrong, skin gray with shock. No sign of Clyde or the other passengers. She tore a strip from her torn skirt and bound his leg the best she could, fighting the shiver of exhaustion. The simple act steadied her, reminded her she still had purpose. Then movement, a shadow across the river. Clara froze. Out of the trees came a tall rider on a painted horse. The man's skin bore the bronze of the desert, his black hair tied back a Winchester across his back, and a knife hanging from a worn leather belt. His gaze swept the wreckage, then fixed on her. He didn't move, didn't need to. He was like a hawk sizing up its next breath. He dismounted, slow and deliberate boots sinking into the mud. His gray eyes held no warmth, only calm. Clara forced herself to stand, voice trembling. "We're hurt," she managed. "Can you help us?" He glanced at Hank, then at her. His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that made you listen. "He won't make it long. It wasn't cruel, just truth." "Please," Clara whispered. "Help me move him." The Apache knelt beside the dying man, and lifted him as if he weighed nothing. Clara followed, guiding them toward a patch of grass. The merchant's breath rattled. It was clear he wouldn't see the next sunrise. When it was done, the stranger stood tall, silent, and still. His shadow stretched over her. "You're far from home," he said quietly. "So, are you?" Clara replied, before she could stop herself. A faint flicker crossed his face, maybe surprise. Then simply Taye. She blinked. "What? My name," he said. Clara swallowed. "Clara Brooks." They stood there for a long, strange moment, two survivors at the edge of nowhere, bound by nothing but loss and the rising sun. And though she didn't yet know it, this man, this silent Apache, would soon change everything she believed about love, trust, and survival on the wild frontier. When it was done, Clara Brooks sank to her knees, weak from exhaustion. The man straightened tall against the rising sun, his shadow spilling over her like a dark wave. "You're far from home," he said quietly. "So are you?" she answered, before she could think better of it. For the first time, something flickered behind his gray eyes. Not anger, not suspicion, just a brief human spark. Then he spoke, his voice low, roughened by sand and wind. "Taye." She blinked. "What?" "My name," he said again. "Taye." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Clara Brooks." For a long moment they just stared at one another. He seemed to see straight through her, through the mud on her skin, through the tremor in her hands, into the fear she'd been carrying, like a wound that never healed. Her fingers tightened around the hidden journal under her dress. She swore he could hear the pounding of her heart against the leather cover. Finally, Taye broke the silence. "This river draws scavengers, wolves, and men worse than wolves. You can't stay here." Clara swallowed, glancing at Hank Dobbs lying pale in the grass. She had always been careful with strangers, but something in Taye's tone was steady, certain the kind of truth you didn't argue with. "I need to reach the nearest town," she said quietly. Taye studied her a long moment, weighing her like a man who'd learned to trust slowly, if at all. Then he gave a single nod. "Copper Bend. 2 days' ride." Her gaze drifted to Hank. His breathing was shallow now, his eyes half-lidded. And him she whispered. Taye looked down at the dying man, then back at her. "The river already calls him." Clara's chest tightened, but she pushed herself up anyway. The war had taught her one cruel lesson: grief could wait. Taye led his horse closer and held out a hand. She stared at it for a heartbeat, unsure, but the circling crows above made the choice for her. She reached out her palm, meeting his. His calloused grip was strong and warm, pulling her up into the saddle behind him. She sat stiffly, afraid to lean into the stranger, who smelled faintly of smoke and leather. The horse moved with a steady rhythm beneath them, each step carrying them farther from the wreck and the river. Behind them, the twisted stage lay half-buried in morning mist, a grave for all the pieces of her old life. Clara didn't know if she was riding toward salvation or ruin, only that the man before her rode with the stillness of someone who'd already survived both. For the first time since Missouri, she felt a small ember stir inside her, something like hope, fragile, but alive. By the second evening, Copper Bend appeared a faint glow of lanterns tucked deep in a mountain valley. Smoke hung low between the ridges, and the clang of hammers echoed like distant thunder. Silver had built this place, and the mountain still moaned under its weight. Clara's body ached from 2 long days on horseback. Relief swept through her at the sight of roofs and lamplight, the promise of civilization, or something pretending to be it. Yet unease prickled her spine. The West could dress itself up, but cruelty wore many faces. The streets buzzed even at dusk. Miners stumbling from the saloon shirts, black with soot, laughter sharp and mean. Freight wagons rattled past toward the smelter, their wheels grinding over dust and broken stone. At the far end of the street rose the grandest building in town, its windows glowing gold, the Copper Bend Hotel. Beside it stood a fine house with trimmed hedges, the only green in miles. Taye's horse slowed. Men drinking outside the saloon fell silent, their stares cutting through the noise. A boy pointed. His mother grabbed his hand and pulled him away. The tension in the air was thick, and all of it aimed at Taye. "They're staring," Clara whispered. "They always do," Taye said flatly, dismounting. He handed a few coins to the stable boy, Luke Callahan, who hesitated before taking them, his eyes darting between Clara and the Apache. Taye adjusted the rifle slung across his shoulder. "I'll be nearby," he said. "You should find a room." Clara nodded, though her stomach twisted. 2 days in his company had made her strangely used to his presence. The thought of facing this rough town alone made her uneasy, but she knew how folks here talked. A woman clinging to an Apache wouldn't find much welcome. "Thank you," she said softly. His eyes lingered on hers a moment longer than they should have. Then he touched the brim of his hat and turned away, disappearing into the shadowed end of the street. Clara found lodging above a small cafe owned by a sharp-eyed widow named Mary Beth Dobbs. The woman had the look of someone who'd seen everything and still managed to smile through it. After hearing Clara could cook and help with breakfast, Mary Beth offered her a room and meals in exchange for work. Clara accepted without hesitation. Before dawn, she joined the clatter of pans and the hiss of coffee pots. Work steadied her hands, gave her something to do besides clutch that cursed journal. By sunrise, the cafe filled with miners gulping down biscuits, clerks murmuring over ledgers, gamblers nursing their regrets from the night before. Clara moved quietly among them, pouring coffee and listening. The same names kept surfacing in their talk: Wade Cross and the Copper Bend mine. Wade Cross owned half the valley, the smelter, the wagons, the water rights. To some, he was the town's lifeblood, to others its poison. Without him, there'd be no wages. But with him came debt-broken bodies and whispers of darker dealings. Clara's gut told her the truth. If the ledger she carried held any meaning, Wade Cross's name would be carved deep within its pages. That evening, as she wiped down tables, the cafe door banged open. A group of men stumbled in loud with whiskey and laughter. One of them, broad-shouldered, with a fiery red beard, swaggered straight toward her. "Well now," he drawled, his breath thick with liquor. "Ain't seen your face before." His hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist. Clara froze. The cafe fell silent. Every head turned. Mary Beth Dobbs started forward, but one of the drunkards blocked her way, grinning through whiskey-stained teeth. Jed Crow, a big man with a red beard and mean eyes, wrapped his rough fingers around Clara Brooks's wrist. Well, now he slurred, breath sour. "Ain't you a pretty little thing? What's your price for some company tonight?" Her pulse jumped. "Let go," she said, voice tight. He chuckled. "Or what?" Before she could move, the door creaked open. The sound hit the room like thunder. Every man inside turned. Taye stood in the doorway, dust still clinging to his boots, his face unreadable beneath the wide brim of his hat. His gaze locked on Jed's hand, gripping Clara's arm. In 2 strides, he crossed the room. Silent, controlled, dangerous. Jed smirked, but his fingers twitched. "Well, look what wandered in the Apache man, come to rescue his gal." Taye didn't raise his voice. "Let go." Something in his tone, quiet, cold, final, made every man in the room freeze. For one tense heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Jed's grin faltered. He dropped Clara's wrist as if burned. Taye's gray eyes swept the room calm as a loaded gun. "Anyone else?" he asked softly. No one answered. He turned to Clara. "You all right?" Her throat tightened. "Yes, thank you." He gave a single nod and walked out without another word, his boots echoing against the floorboards. Clara's knees wobbled. She clung to a rag to steady herself, heart pounding not only from fear, but from something deeper, something she didn't dare name. Sleep never came that night. She stepped onto the small balcony outside her rented room, the air cool beneath a sky scattered with stars. Below, Copperbend's streets had quieted, save for the faint music drifting from the saloons. Across the street, a tall figure leaned against a hitching post, motionless hat pulled low. Taye. He wasn't there for a drink or a meal. He was there because he'd known she'd need him before she even realized it herself. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the hidden journal beneath her nightdress. For the first time since leaving Missouri, fear wasn't the only thing inside her heart. 2 days later, while serving coffee, she carried a tray to a corner table where 2 dusty miners whispered over their cups. Zeke Callahan was one of them, his voice low but sharp with worry. "Another woman gone," he said. "That makes 3 this month." "Best hush," the other muttered. "You want Wade Cross's men knocking at your door?" Clara steadied her hands before the tray could rattle. Another woman missing. The same kind of whispers she'd once heard back east, girls disappearing along the rivers, names no one dared speak again. Her stomach tightened like a fist. That evening she found Taye by the stables, his horse half-saddled in the fading light. "They're taking women," she said, breath uneven. "I heard the miners talking. It's him, isn't it, Wade Cross?" Taye studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I've seen wagons at night," he said quietly. "Canvas covered. Headed down toward the river. Then we have to do something," she insisted, fire lighting her eyes. "You can't fight a man who owns the law," he replied. "Then we find proof she shot back. I have pages from the ledger. If we link them to what you saw—" He cut her off, jaw tight. "It'll paint a target on your back." "It already has," she whispered. He exhaled a heavy sound that carried both weariness and warning. Then he said, "Meet me tomorrow by the river." That night, Clara couldn't rest. She lay awake, the leather-bound journal clutched against her chest. Her thoughts kept drifting to Taye, to the quiet strength in his eyes, to the grief that ran deep as the desert valleys he'd come from. The town feared him, but she saw what they couldn't. Beneath the scars and silence was a kind of honor no lawman could match. She thought of the women who'd vanished, of the coded ledgers hidden under her bed, and of the truth she'd tried so long to outrun. Maybe the war hadn't ended, after all. It had only changed its shape. When dawn touched the rooftops of Copperbend, the clang of hammers and rumble of ore wagons filled the air again. Clara tied her hair back, tucked the journal into her bodice, and made a silent vow. The time for running was over. Tomorrow night she'd walk with Taye into the shadows by the river. And whatever waited there, she would face it, because for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. The river carved through the valley like a scar, dark, restless whispering under the rising moon. Willow branches bent low over the water, the air thick with the hum of night creatures. Clara stood close to Taye, shivering though the summer air was warm. Her nerves had been strung tight since sundown. Taye crouched beside her, his hand brushing the sand. "Wagon tracks," he murmured. "Fresh. They'll come tonight." Clara nodded, clutching the journal against her ribs. She'd copied figures and names onto loose scraps, leaving the original hidden in her room at the cafe. Tonight they meant to see the truth for themselves, the kind of truth men killed to keep buried. They settled into a patch of brush overlooking the riverbank. Taye lay prone, rifle steady across his arms. He was so still he could have been carved from the rock itself. Clara tried to match his quiet patience, but her body hummed with unease. The hours crawled. The river whispered. Insects buzzed. Fatigue pressed heavy on her eyes. She pinched her arm, whispered half-formed prayers. Still, the darkness pulled her under. Suddenly, she was back in Virginia, the canvas walls of a field hospital trembling under cannon fire. Lanterns swung wildly above rows of cots. The air reeked of blood and smoke. Men cried out all around her, some pleading, some raging, others fading into the silence of death. Clara pressed her hands to a soldier's chest, trying to stop the bleeding, but the red kept spreading. His eyes, impossibly blue, stared up at her, the same eyes she'd kissed beneath an oak tree before the war took him. "Don't leave me," he whispered. Then his body went still. Clara screamed and woke to the whispering river, the sound of her own ragged breath, and Taye's strong hands gripping her shoulders. "Clara!" The voice came from somewhere inside her dream, hoarse, desperate. She turned and saw him, a young soldier lying on a blood-soaked cot, his chest torn open by shrapnel, his eyes impossibly blue, the same eyes she'd kissed beneath an oak tree before he marched off to war. She pressed her hands to the wound, the bandages useless beneath the rush of crimson. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice breaking. The blood kept coming warm and slick between her fingers, staining her skirt, her boots, the dirt floor beneath her knees. "Don't leave me," he whispered, and then his head fell still. Clara screamed. Her eyes snapped open. She was back by the riverbank, moonlight silvering the world around her. Tears streaked her cheeks. Her chest heaved for air. Taye's hands gripped her shoulders, firm but gentle. His voice was low, steady as the current beside them. "Breathe," he murmured. "It's only a dream. You're safe." She trembled violently. He died, and I couldn't stop it. His gray eyes held hers, deep, unflinching. "I know loss," he said softly. "I carry it too." He pulled her into his arms, letting her shake against him until her breathing slowed. The smell of leather and smoke clung to his shirt. The steady beat of his heart anchored her in the here and now. Slowly, her sobs quieted. For a long moment, she stayed there, head against his chest, eyes closed. She should have pulled away, but didn't. When she finally looked up, his expression was unreadable, though his hands lingered on her shoulders like he wasn't ready to let go. Then the faint creak of wagon wheels drifted up from downriver. Taye stiffened, released her gently, and motioned for silence. They moved deeper into the brush, low to the ground. Clara wiped her face and steadied her breath, though her heart still hammered in her chest. Downstream lanterns bobbed like ghostly fireflies along the bank. 2 wagons had rolled to the water's edge, mules snorting in the dark. 6 men climbed down, their voices low and sharp. Taye crouched, eyes fixed on them, as they hefted heavy crates from the wagon beds. One man cursed when a box slipped and cracked against a rock. The lantern light caught a mark burned into the wood, a circle, enclosing a single M. Clara's breath hitched. She gripped Taye's arm. "That's it, Wade Cross's brand. The same one in the ledger." Taye nodded once. "Weapons," he murmured. Clara strained to hear. Across the water, a voice carried through the night. "Wade wants the shipment in San Juan by week's end. Railroad men expect their cut." There it was, proof. The link she both needed and feared. The men loaded the crates onto a flatboat tied along the shore. Then another wagon rolled up this one with a canvas cover. Clara leaned forward, her stomach knotting. When the rear flap lifted, her breath caught in her throat. 3 women were inside, bound and gagged, their wrists raw from rope. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She turned to Taye, horror flooding her face. His jaw hardened, but in his eyes flickered something far deeper pain carved from old scars. Not the first time, he muttered under his breath. But it'll be the last. If we stop it. The men shoved the women onto the boat like livestock. One stumbled, nearly falling into the river before being yanked upright. Clara dug her nails into the dirt, fury burning through her fear. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run down there and fight. But Taye's hand found her arm steady and unyielding. "Not yet," he whispered. "We'll lose everything." She turned on him, whispering fiercely. "How can you just stand here?" For a heartbeat, their eyes met. And she saw his soul laid bare, haunted hollow, yet burning with the same grief that clawed at her. "Because I tried once," he said quietly, "and I lost her. Your sister." Clara breathed. He didn't answer, but the silence told her enough. The boat shoved off lanterns, swaying as it drifted downriver. The wagons creaked away into the darkness, leaving only the hiss of the current. When the last sound faded, Taye rose slowly, his shoulders drawn tight. "We have proof now. Wade Cross's hand is in this, all of it." Clara's heart hammered, filled with equal parts rage and sorrow. "Then we take it to Eli Boone," she said. Taye shook his head. "The sheriff's bought and paid for. You bring him this, you won't see another sunrise." Then what she demanded. He studied her a long moment. "We watch. We gather more. We find someone Wade can't buy. Until then we live." Clara clenched her fists, her body trembling with the need to act. Every instinct screamed to fight, to expose the truth. But the image of those bound women silenced her. One wrong move and she'd join them. "I understand," she whispered. Taye's hard features softened just a fraction. "You're stronger than you know." The words, plain steady, lit a fragile warmth inside her, battling the chill of the night. They walked back toward Copper Bend in silence. The journal pressed heavy against Clara's ribs, each step a weight of what they'd witnessed. But as dawn bled across the horizon, she glanced at Taye, tall, steady, carved by loss and endurance, and for the first time she realized she wasn't walking into battle alone. Sleep never came the next night. The images refused to leave her, the women shoved like cattle, the mark of Wade Cross scorched into every crate. Every creak of the floorboards above Mary Beth Dobbs's cafe made her jolt upright. Before dawn, Clara Brooks rose from the narrow bed. The air was cold enough to bite. She poured water from a cracked pitcher and splashed her face until her skin stung. Her reflection in the warped glass looked older, harder. Beneath the loose floorboard lay the ledger, the one she'd risked everything to keep. She pulled it free and opened it on the bed. The inked circle with the M stared back at her like a brand, the same mark burned into the crates she and Taye had seen by the river. Each line of numbers and routes whispered corruption towns, shipments, river crossings, dates. Her hands trembled as she copied the latest figures onto scraps of paper. If the ledger vanished, she wouldn't lose the proof with it. A soft knock startled her. She froze, clutching the ledger shut. "It's me." Taye's voice, low and steady, came from the other side. Clara lifted the latch, and he stepped inside, ducking beneath the doorframe. His eyes swept the small room sharp as ever. "You shouldn't keep that out," he said, nodding toward the book. "I couldn't sleep," Clara admitted quietly. "I keep seeing those women." Something flickered in his eyes, the kind of understanding born from shared ghosts. "So do I." They didn't talk much after that. Words seemed too small for the weight they carried. Taye stood by the window, scanning the still streets below. "You need an ally," he said finally. "Someone Wade Cross can't buy." Clara frowned. "Who Evelyn Hart? Runs the orphanage on the edge of town. Folks think she's just another widow with too many mouths to feed, but she's got grit." Years back, she smuggled a woman and her children out from a miners' camp after he near beat them to death. Risked her life doing it. She'll help." Clara listened in silence, picturing this woman, another soul standing against the storm. "Then take me to her," she said. The orphanage stood past the last row of shanties, a weathered clapboard house surrounded by a yard full of barefoot children. Laughter drifted through the dry morning air. Inside, Evelyn Hart greeted them with wary eyes, but a kind smile. Her hair, streaked with silver, framed a face worn by both grace and grief. When Taye explained what they'd seen by the river, Evelyn's hand trembled around her teacup. I suspected she whispered. "Women vanish, and no one speaks their names. Wade Cross buys silence the same way he buys land cheap and fast. And I—" She hesitated, voice cracking. "Since what?" Clara asked softly. "Since the last woman I tried to help never made it out. The McGraw men found her, buried her in the churchyard myself. I told myself I had to think of the children. But truth is, I was just scared." Clara reached across the table, covering Evelyn's hand. "We all know fear, but you've already been braver than most." Taye gave a single approving nod. Evelyn drew a breath, shoulders squaring. "Then I'll help you, whatever it takes." None of them knew that Wade Cross's eyes were already on them. That night, Clara returned to her room. She'd barely set her lamp down when a floorboard creaked in the hall. She thought it was Mary Beth Dobbs, until her door burst open. Two of the McGraws stormed in, faces half hidden by scarves. One pinned her against the wall, while the other tore through her drawers. No, Clara struggled, kicking, biting. She sank her teeth into the man's hand. He cursed and struck her hard across the face. Pain exploded behind her eyes. "Find it," the other snarled. A board scraped under the bed, the sound of her worst fear coming true. "Got it," one shouted, yanking the ledger free. "Don't," she gasped, but a fist slammed into her ribs. Air fled her lungs. She fell hard to the floor, gasping as the men vanished into the night. Moments later, the door burst open again. This time it was Taye. Rifle in hand, eyes burning. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Clara, what happened?" "The ledger," she wheezed. "They took it." Taye cursed under his breath, helping her upright. "We move now. Wade Cross won't stop until you're silenced." They slipped out the back door into the cold alleys of Copper Bend. Shadows moved in the distance, men searching, spreading like wolves on the hunt. Where Clara whispered, her breath ragged. "The hills," Taye said. "We'll lose them in the rocks." They ran until Clara's lungs felt raw. Dust rose around their boots. Finally, Taye pulled her into a narrow canyon where moonlight barely touched the ground. He guided her into a hollow, beneath a ledge hidden by scrub and stone. Clara clutched her ribs, the pain deep and sharp. "It's gone," she said weakly. "Everything's gone." Taye shook his head. "You copied some pages. That's something." "Not enough to bring him down," she said bitterly. "He'll call me a liar, a fraud. Without the ledger, I'm nothing." Taye leaned close, his voice low and even. "We're not beaten yet." The night air cut cold through her dress, and Clara shivered uncontrollably. Without a word, Taye shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. When she still trembled, he pulled her close. The warmth of him seeped through the fabric. For a long time, they sat like that, listening to the river whisper far below. Her head rested against his chest, their breaths falling into rhythm. After a while, she whispered, Why risk yourself for me?" Taye's jaw tightened. His answer came soft, raw. "Because once he said I didn't. My sister was taken when soldiers raided our camp," Taye said quietly, staring into the canyon's darkness. "I hesitated. Thought I could reason with them. Wait for the right time. His voice roughened. I never saw her again. I won't make that mistake twice. Clara Brooks lifted her face toward him, eyes glistening in the faint starlight. I'm sorry, she whispered. Taye shook his head. Don't be. Just live. Her throat tightened. She studied him in silence, the harsh lines weathered by sun and time, the scar cutting along his jaw, and those gray eyes weighted by memories too heavy to name. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek. He didn't flinch. Instead, he bent his head slightly, and his lips brushed her forehead light as a promise fleeting as smoke, yet more binding than any oath. Clara closed her eyes. For that heartbeat beneath the canyon walls, fear loosened its grip. When dawn broke, Taye stirred her awake. His voice was sharper now, the calm of a man preparing for war. Wade Cross thinks he's won. He has the ledger, but he doesn't have you. You saw his crates. You heard his men say his name. That makes you the biggest threat he's got. Clara sat up, her jaw tightening. Then he'll come for me. Taye nodded once. And we'll be ready. The sun sank low over Copperbend, painting the rooftops in fire and shadow. Clara stood on the balcony above Mary Beth Dobbs's cafe, her cheek still sore from the blow of one of Wade's men. Below, wagons rattled toward the smelter, iron wheels clanging like thunder. The ledger was gone, so was her clean proof, yet inside her burned a fiercer fire one that no man's fists could quench. The image of those women bound and gagged haunted her every waking hour. She would not let them vanish into silence. Down below, Taye leaned against the alley wall, half hidden in shadow. When their eyes met, his steadiness felt like solid ground. Clara descended the steps, heart pounding. They have the ledger, she said, but they don't have me. I remember everything, the crates, the routes, the words they used. I can still bring Wade Cross down. Not alone, Taye said. Not alone, she agreed. With you and others who've lost more than fear. They gathered, slowly drawn by whispered words and old anger. Evelyn Hart came first, her shawl wrapped tight, eyes lined with both fear and resolve. If not now, she said quietly, then never. Next came half a dozen miners, Zeke Callahan among them. Faces blackened by soot, eyes hardened by years of Wade Cross's cruelty. One had a crooked arm mangled in an accident Wade's foreman refused to treat. Another's brother had vanished after daring to speak against him. They didn't come for money or glory. They came because they were done being silent. Even Eli Boone, the town sheriff, arrived, his badge, dull hand trembling around his revolver. I've let him own me too long, he confessed. If I'm going to stand for what's right, it's now or never. Clara looked around at them all, Taye beside her. Evelyn's quiet courage, the miners' grim faces, the sheriff's shame turned to purpose. For the first time since Missouri, she felt her burden lift shared by many shoulders. The plan was simple, but deadly. Clara would pose as a buyer, someone interested in Wade Cross's illicit shipments. Taye would cover her from the shadows, rifle ready. The others would lie in wait along the riverbank. The goal wasn't blood, it was justice. They needed Wade alive to face what he'd built on fear. As dusk deepened, Clara dressed plainly, sewing the copied scraps of the ledger into her bodice. She brushed back her hair and stared into the cracked mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the nurse who'd once tended dying soldiers, nor the frightened fugitive who'd fled Missouri. She was something new, something forged by loss and courage alike. A knock came at the door. Taye stepped in, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes meeting hers. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Yes, I do. They stood in silence for a moment, two souls caught between fate and choice. Then Clara's voice broke softly. I'm scared, Taye, but I'd rather die fighting than live running. He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His touch lingered. If you fall, he said, I'll carry your memory. His voice dropped rough with feeling. But I'd rather carry you. Her heart tightened painfully. Before she could speak, he bent his head, and their lips met. The kiss wasn't tender. It was fierce, desperate, born from too much loss and too little time. For Clara, it was fire, a burning that swept away the ghosts of soldiers lost and promises buried. For Taye, it was surrender, a bridge between two worlds that no bullet could destroy. When they broke apart, her breath trembled. If this is our last night, she whispered, I want it with you. Taye pressed his forehead against hers. Then we'll see the dawn together. They rode beneath the moonlight, the river gleaming like a silver blade ahead. The others waited hidden in the rocks and brush, silent as ghosts. Clara walked toward the water's edge, her steps steady though her pulse raced. Lanterns flickered up, river wagons approached, wheels grinding over gravel, mules snorting. Laughter and rough voices carried across the dark. Then came Wade Cross himself, coat fine posture, proud face, illuminated in the yellow glow. Clara stepped into the open. Mr. Cross, she called. The men froze. Wade dismounted, boots crunching over the stones. His voice was cold and cutting. And who might you be? She met his gaze, chin high. A buyer, Clara said evenly. Word travels fast in these parts. They say you sell things no one else dares to. I came for a shipment, Clara Brooks said, her voice carrying steady across the riverbank. Weapons and whatever else you're moving down this water. Wade Cross's eyes narrowed. His expression turned sharp as a knife. He motioned to his men. Search her. Before they could move, a rifle cracked from the shadows. A hat spun clean off one man's head. Touch her. Taye's voice rang out low but deadly, and the next shot goes through. Chaos broke loose. From the brush, Zeke Callahan and the miners rose, guns drawn. Eli Boone stepped out from behind a wagon, his badge flashing under the moon. Oh, and Wade, he called, voice shaking. But sure you're under arrest. Gunfire split the night. The wagons jolted, crates splintering. The river churned as stray bullets struck the water. Clara ducked low, heart-hammering fingers gripping the pistol Taye had pressed into her hand hours before. She aimed, breath trembling, and fired. The shot hit true, splintering a wagon wheel. The load tipped, crashing sideways, scattering crates marked with Wade's crimson sigil. Taye fought like a man forged by war, his rifle roaring through the smoke. His eyes never left Clara, even as bullets tore through the air around him. Wade Cross snarled, firing wildly. You think you can take me? I own this town? Not anymore! Clara shouted back, her voice fierce as thunder. Evelyn Hart and the miners surged forward, their courage born of years in chains. One of them tackled Wade hard into the mud, wrenching the revolver from his hand. The fight raged, echoing through the valley, until finally the McGraw men lay scattered and broken. Wade Cross himself knelt in the dirt, coat torn lip, bleeding, the river beside him, running red with reflected firelight. Clara stumbled forward, her chest heaving, hands trembling from the recoil. Taye reached her, pulling her against him. His body was solid, steady, an anchor in the chaos. It's over, he murmured, though his eyes still swept the darkness, alert for the next threat. Clara pressed her forehead to his chest. For tonight, she whispered, but not forever. He drew her close, his arms strong around her shoulders. Then we'll be ready for tomorrow. By dawn, Wade Cross was shackled. His empire of fear had fallen with him. Some of his men lay dead, others fled, and a few knelt in the mud hands raised broken by the weight of their own sins. The townsfolk gathered in silence, as if waking from a long nightmare. Sheriff Eli Boone, face pale, eyes hollow, stood in the rising light and raised his badge. For once, he said hoarsely, "Justice." Clara and Taye stood on the riverbank, watching the sunrise stretch gold across the bloodied water. The ledger was gone, but truth didn't need ink. It was written in courage in broken crates and freed captives in the faces of those who had chosen to fight back. Clara turned to Taye, her voice trembling but sure. "You kept your promise," she said. "We saw the dawn together." He met her gaze, and though he didn't speak, she saw everything in his silence. Grief, hope, and a love born out of fire and loss. Copperbend woke slowly that morning like a town shaking off a bad dream. Smoke still drifted over the rooftops where the gunfight had raged. The clang of hammers at the smelter came softer now, like a prayer instead of a curse. Folks spoke in hushed tones, eyes drifting toward the jailhouse. Inside, Wade Cross sat behind iron bars, his empire reduced to dust. Sheriff Boone had walked him down Main Street at dawn, his badge gleaming his hand steady for the first time in years. The townsfolk watched in stunned silence the man who had ruled them through fear, now dragged through the mud. There were no cheers, only a quiet disbelief, as if they still couldn't believe he'd truly fallen. Clara stood on the balcony above Mary Beth Dobbs's cafe, the light warming her tired face. Her dress was torn, her hands still blackened from gunpowder, but she stood tall. Beside her, Evelyn Hart wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, eyes glistening with pride and sorrow. "You did more than any of us ever dared," she whispered. Clara shook her head softly. "Not me, us." Below, Taye leaned against a hitching post hat pulled low against the morning glare. He didn't look up, but she knew he felt her eyes on him. Inside the jailhouse, Wade paced like a caged wolf, his lip split, one eye swollen shut. When he saw Clara enter, his mouth twisted into a bitter grin. "You think you've beaten me," he spat. "You're a fool. My friends in Denver won't let me rot here. You'll be dead before I hang." Clara met his gaze, her voice calm as steel. "You'll face justice, Wade, even if it comes slow." Taye stepped forward, his shadow falling across the bars. "Best pray the court gets to you before the miners do." For the first time, Wade Cross looked away. Days passed. Pastor Whitlow and the federal marshals rode in to take Wade into custody. Eli Boone knew his authority wouldn't hold forever. Clara's name spread across Copperbend, not whispered in gossip anymore, but spoken with respect. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts when she passed. Miners tipped their hats. Even Mary Beth Dobbs, once sharp-eyed and cautious, pressed a warm loaf of bread into her hands. "You've done more good here," she said softly, "than every preacher in this valley combined." Clara should have felt pride, but at night when the lamp burned low, her heart stayed heavy. She dreamed of the women taken by riverboat, of their cries echoing over dark water. Wade Cross was captured, yes, but his reach had been long, and she knew evil had roots far deeper than Copperbend's soil. One evening she found Taye waiting behind the cafe, the sunset painting the hills in fire and gold. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. Clara folded her arms, staring at the horizon. "Maybe, but men like Wade always come back. Someone else will fill his boots." Maybe Taye admitted. But now the folks here know they can stand. That matters, Clara Brooks said quietly, turning toward him. But what about you, Taye? Will you keep wandering after Wade Cross is gone? Taye's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. The last light of evening cast his face in sharp relief. The strong lines, the calm beneath the scars. I've been wandering most of my life, he said. My people scattered, my sister taken. For a long time I thought I didn't belong anywhere. He looked at her, then gray eyes steady as river stone. But I've found something worth stopping for. Clara's breath caught. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint scent of dust and leather that clung to him. Taye. His hand brushed hers, calloused, warm, certain. I don't have land. I don't have much to offer. But I've got hope, he said softly, and it's yours if you'll have it. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she smiled through them. You're all I ever wanted. He pulled her into his arms, and for a moment the world vanished, the murmur of wagons, the watchful eyes of townsfolk, the weight of every battle behind them. All that remained was his steady heartbeat, the smell of smoke and sage, and a promise sealed in a single kiss. When Pastor Whitlow and the federal marshals arrived, Wade Cross was hauled into the street in irons. A few townsfolk jeered, some spat, but most stood silent, staring at the man who had ruled them through fear, now reduced to a prisoner on his way to Denver. Clara stood among them, her hand entwined with Taye's. Beside her, Evelyn Hart folded her hands tight, her expression grave. It's not over, Evelyn said quietly. There'll be others like him. But you've given people courage. That's how change begins. Clara squeezed her friend's hand. Then we'll keep fighting in whatever way we can. Evelyn nodded, eyes soft with warmth. And you'll have each other. That makes all the difference. Weeks passed, and Copper Bend found a new rhythm. The saloon no longer roared with nightly brawls. The smelter fires still burned, but slower, now steadier. The town wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was changed. Clara and Taye moved to a small patch of land just beyond the Red River Bend, the place where their story had turned. Together they built a cabin from rough-hewn logs, its porch facing the valley. A stone hearth, a single rocking chair, and a small corral for the horses. It wasn't much, but to Clara it was everything she'd once prayed for. A home born not from fear, but from hope. She tended a tiny garden, coaxing green from the stubborn earth. Taye worked the horses, his strong hands, patient, his quiet strength, filling the silence between them. At night they sat by the fire, speaking little content with the music of crackling wood and the rustle of the wind through the grass. Sometimes Clara still woke from dreams of the battlefield, the screams, the blood, the faces of the dying. Every time Taye was there beside her, his arm steady across her shoulders until her breathing slowed again. And sometimes it was he who woke in silence, haunted by the memory of Ahioka. On those nights, Clara took his hand and held it against her heart until the tremor passed. One morning, as dawn spilled gold across the valley, Clara stepped onto the porch, a shawl around her shoulders. Taye joined her, a steaming tin cup in his hand. They stood side by side, watching the Red River catch fire in the light. She slipped her arm around his waist. Do you ever wonder what tomorrow will bring? He took a slow sip. Eyes fixed on the horizon. Always, he said. Then, after a pause, but for the first time, I look forward to it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. So do I. Below them, the river murmured on, endless, untamed, eternal. Copper Bend still bore its scars, and the world beyond the hills would always be uncertain. But here on this patch of wild earth, two souls had found what they'd both been running from: peace and each other. As sunlight filled the valley, Clara knew one truth clear as prayer. Whatever storms the West might bring, she and Taye would face them side by side. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.